welcome, and the main thrust for me, at least, is the privilege that the President has of once a year being able to award a medal. And I'm delighted this year to be joined virtually by Professor Jill Thistlethwaite, this year's recipient of the President's Medal. Now, the President's Medal is given annually to a member of ASME who has made a sustained and valued contribution to the organisation and to the wider medical education community. Jill certainly fulfills the criteria for her continued and outstanding contribution to medical education. Many of you will know her as the editor of The Clinical Teacher and associate editor of the Journal of Interprofessional Care. She has, however, many other roles. Clinical Chair of New South Wales Hospital Non-Specialist Programme, Health Education Training Institute, Medical Advisor, NPS, Medicine Wise, Sydney, Australia, Consultant in Medical and Interprofessional Education. She still is a sessional GP at the University of Sydney Health Service and an adjunct professor at University of Technology, Sydney. Jill is a graduate of UCH, along with all the best people, could I say, and went on to become a GP and then stepped quickly into medical education. She gained a PhD from the University of Maastricht in medical education. She was a Fulbright Senior Scholar in Minnesota, Professor of Medical Education at Warwick Medical School. She's been awarded too numerous to mention in a bite-size, grants and consultancies. And at the last count, and these numbers in fact will only go up, she's authored 7 books. She's edited a further 6 books. She's written chapters in 29 books. She's written 150 articles in peer-reviewed journals. She's been invited to present and lecture all over the world, and also found time to supervise 10 master's dissertations, 7 PhD students, and is also an examiner in both the master's and PhDs in medical education. There is no doubt that this was an easy choice this year, and I'm sure you will all agree with me that Jill is a worthy recipient of the President's Medal. I have here the President's Medal, which I will now present. Over to Jill.
Thank you very much, Derek, for those very kind words. I am very honoured to receive the President's Medal. I've seen this awarded to so many fantastic people over the years, and it makes me feel very humbled to be part of their company. So thank you very much, and I think we'll get on with the rest of the evening. I'm looking forward to talking about one of my passions. So I'm just going to, I've got a few slides to begin with, just to set the scene, but we'll go into the question and answer session really quickly because that's what you're here for. So I'll just get into sharing my screen. So this is a bite-sized session on Ask the Editor. It's going to be difficult to keep it bite-sized because there's so much that I could cover. But just to think that that picture of Snoopy there, I had my first article published as a GP trainee, which I typed on a very old typewriter that my training practice sold to me for £15. I don't quite know why they needed the £15 and why they couldn't just give me the typewriter, but that's where I started, and I taught myself to touch type so I could write. And I'm very honoured that Kevin Eva, who's the editor of Medical Education, which is pictured there, is also here tonight. So you've heard a little bit about me, so I'm not going to go into this. I'm doing this session from a house overlooking a lake 300 kilometres north of Sydney, which is where I'm living at the moment during the pandemic. And I would say that one of the main things about being a writer is that you need to be a reader. And I've been a passionate reader since I was about 3. So reading is very important. And here, these are a few of my very early forays into publications, more sort of educating other GPs rather than the scholarly papers that I got into later. And that picture at the bottom is me as a quite young GP when we first computerized our general practice in West Yorkshire. And I wrote a piece for a now defunct journal called Medical Economics, I think it was, something like that. And I won the Writer of the Year award, which was really fantastic. And that was about the dangers and the concerns and the technical problems of computerizing your practice all those years ago. So firstly, as an editor, my responsibility is to the reader. And if we were doing this as a kind of face-to-face session, I would get people to say what they think an editor's responsibility to an author is. But you have to remember it's about the readers, and the authors have to please my readership. And I have a relationship with my readership, and I want them to enjoy and like the things that they read in the journal. This is actually a slide that I think I got from Kevin at one point, and many of you will know this journey, which is pretty much the journey for scholarly papers, but we can touch on any kind of writing in this session that people are interested in. And hopefully most people will be getting a revised decision after learning a bit more about writing. So when you're considering writing something, whatever it may be, this is pretty much anything that you might want to write. You want to think about who it's for, so the reader and the writer. What's it going to be about? And that's the scope, the expectations, the differences in the different types of writing between clinical writing, scientific, academic writing. Is it something you're writing to present? How do you look at the evidence? All of these things, lots of things to think about when you're looking at the what. Where are you going to publish? What sort of outlets are there? And while we may be, as ASME, thinking mostly about scholarly journals, there are lots of ways to get into, not necessarily print these days, but online. And since I started, there's been all sorts of additional ways of doing that through things like podcasts and open access platforms, Twitter even. Oops, sorry, going the wrong way. How do you write? So thinking about getting started, your style of writing, author guidelines, being careful about plagiarism, and all those different things down there which help you in your style and how to write. And why do you write? You know, what is it that motivates people to write? For me, originally, it was to get my name in print. And I'm going to be very honest about that. It's not quite the same motivation now, but you know, it's hard to write, so you really need to be motivated. And you have to work at it, and you have to get used to rejection and just keep on going. So why write? And for me, not writing is worse than writing. And I take that from a famous GP writer of years ago. Not writing is actually worse than writing. And there's lots of other things that may motivate you. For some people, it's part of their job. That's not necessarily the best motivating factor. Who are you writing for? We're mostly talking in scholarly journals about writing for professional groups, but I also write for consumers, and that consumers' patients, and that's a different way of writing. But that's, some people might be interested in doing that, and that leaves you with many additional outlets for your work. Every article that you write, every chapter that you write, every blog that you write needs to have a hook that draws the reader in. This is from a paper by Lorelei Lingard, and again, this is more about the scholarly papers. But you have that, for anything that you write, anything that you read, it's something that's drawing you into that, makes you want to continue reading. So it's really important to think of that. And here's just some of the things that you can write. I've written in most of these things, so but you know, there's differences and similarities between all of these. So I'm now going to start with some questions while everyone's warming up. Some questions that we received by email, and these are actually 3 questions from the same person who I know is online. From Celia, who's at Central Queensland University in Queensland, which is a lot farther north from here. And she has some very specific questions. Do we have any special editions coming up in the clinical teacher? Not at the moment. There will be one at some point. Many of you will know we did a special edition last year, which was the first themed issue of the clinical teacher in its existence. And that was on health and well-being of health professionals and learners. And it was a very interesting thing for me to do. I had a guest editor and a guest associate editor, and we had a lot of submissions. So yes, there will be one, hopefully next year, but that might have been derailed a little bit because of the pandemic. So we'll have to think about that. But I'd actually be quite interested in hearing from people about what a themed issue should be the next time we do one. How many submissions do you get for journal articles each month, roughly? For the clinical teacher at the moment, and we've just about doubled what we get at the moment since COVID. So at the moment, it's running, it will be running about 800 submissions for the year. So you can divide that by 12. I know that Kevin and medical education get over twice that many. You know, I don't know much about other journals. Journal of Interprofessional Care has also increased the numbers, and that's running at about 400 so far for this year. Do you prioritise medical articles, or would articles involving sonography be something that can be considered? So the clinical teacher is for all clinical educators and learners. It started off mainly as medical, but because of my passion for interprofessional education and because of the associate editors that we have now, we're very keen to receive papers from interprofessional teams or from health professions other than medicine, and we have published quite a lot of these. And just to say for other health professions that the editorial in the October edition issue this year is going to be written by an associate editor who is a nurse with a nursing colleague. So yeah, absolutely sonography. If it's a good article, I certainly consider it. Okay. And then this, I don't know if Becky Johnston is online. I couldn't see her in the list that we had to start with, but Becky Johnston sent this one in. She's at UCL, which is my old university. This is a very complicated question and would probably take a webinar, an hour's webinar in itself. I'll let you read that. And I think one of the reasons why we're getting more submissions at the moment is that people are doing a lot of innovation and adaptation of standard teaching and learning methods. And they've got things that they want to write, and they don't know how to do that. So my first answer to that is read what's coming out at the moment. So we've had many journals have already started publishing articles around adaptation due to COVID. So have a look what's happening, see how people are writing them up. If you are using participant data in your article, then you will have to have ethics or some form of ethical oversight that you can tell us about. And in terms of qualitative feedback, difficult to answer that one because I'm not sure what form that takes, whether that's free text answers to a survey, interviews. So I think, again, have a read of some of the literature around writing and intervention studies and evaluation, and find a mentor, find someone who has published already and get them to help you. I would say that is probably the most succinct way I could answer that without going into too much detail.
We've had a couple of comments which you may not have seen yet, but Kim has let us know that ASME abstract supplement is being published in October. So there is a themed publication coming out. And from our BITESIZE yesterday, Grace has said, ideas for themed issues, equality, diversity, and inclusivity. And that was part of our BITESIZE again yesterday. I'm just waiting now for more questions on the chat. But while I'm waiting, it's not an editor's question, but one that certainly interests me, and that is that you've held senior medical educator appointments in both England and Australia, and perhaps could you tell us what you think are the main differences between those two, let's say, cultures?
That's a big question.
I don't just mean salary, by the way.
Right. Well, I could go into that certainly. And do you mean cultures within a medical school, or culture, in? Well, I mean, in Australia.
How would you compare working there to here? It's simply because you, as I say, you've had senior roles.
It's a lot warmer in Australia, so that's certainly a positive. Yeah, big question. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, obviously, as the Australian medical undergraduate medical curriculum and the way that medical education is framed in Australia follows, very much has followed the British method. And in fact, in Australia, it's similar in that we have some medical schools that are graduate entry only and some that are undergraduate. But the undergraduate ones tend to be more as a 6-year program, and the graduate entry of 4, like they are in the UK. And also, like the UK, the size of medical schools varies. So there are some small medical schools with a cohort of about 70 to 80. And the largest medical school in Australia that I used to work at has an intake of 550 a year, of which about over 200 are overseas students. So that's a large cohort. And one of the differences in Australia is the way that clinical placements are funded, as in they're not really funded. And so finding clinical placements, quality clinical placements for a large number of students can be quite difficult. Many of them do go off into very rural and remote areas to do attachments. And there are lots of small clinical schools dotted around which have their kind of mothership back at the main university. But a lot of it's very similar, yeah, I would say.
Good, thank you.
I could talk about that for a lot longer, but yeah.
I'm sure. I've got a question here from Ryan. How do we make sure to keep up with this accelerated rate of innovation and research? And how do we make sure that everything is effectively based in evidence and all of this research is effectively disseminated, communicated?
Well, you have to, I mean, I think, for anybody, it depends what you're doing and what you want information about. So for example, if you're mainly a clinician in a particular specialty, obviously you're going to concentrate on a certain number of outlets that help you with what's happening, what's new in that specialty. If you're in medical education, you know, there are a number of quality journals that you want to keep up with, particularly looking at tables of contents and, you know, seeing what's of interest. If you have a particular question because you're writing something or studying something, then that's a way of doing it. But no one can keep up with everything. I mean, it's just impossible, as we all know. So, you know, those are things that are having groups of people who can exchange ideas and, you know, sort of point you in the direction where you may have missed something. How we keep up with evidence and utilize evidence in our practice, so evidence-based practice or evidence-guided practice, is very interesting in the time of the pandemic. And some of you may have come across, just published this week, Trish Greenhalgh, who is a professor of primary care in the UK, who is one of the major commentators on evidence-based practice, who's just kind of asked the question, has COVID put paid to evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine? And, you know, there are new ways of doing things. Things are moving at a great pace. Innovations are coming in at very quickly, things like telehealth, remote consultations that would have taken, you know, years to get done before now, if we hadn't had this pandemic. So I think we use evidence. Sometimes there isn't evidence, and we collect the evidence as we go along. And, you know, that's the way we have to do it. So as an example of that, I've been talking on the radio this week in Australia about medicinal cannabis. The Australian government decided to allow medicinal cannabis to be prescribed to certain patients without the types of evidence that normally would be necessary to do medications. And, you know, the evidence is being collected from the people who are being prescribed the medication. And, you know, and it's a different way of doing things, and it's risky, but, you know, that's the way we're going at the moment, I think. Education innovation, probably not as risky. It can be, but probably not as risky as allowing medicines onto the market without all those checks that we're used to. I hope that answers your question.
I hope it has for them. They're coming in now. So from Grace, could you name 3 things that submitted papers and 3 things that you really dislike?
3 things that I like about submitted papers. Okay, probably easy. First of all, they follow the author guidelines. All right, so it is obvious when I read a submitted paper that the person who has written it has read the journal and has read the author guidelines. So the paper fits with what I expect. It's within the word count, it's within the reference limit, it's the type of paper that we publish. So that's one thing. I like things that are interesting, you know, like any reader. So I'm looking at this as, is this going to be interesting for this readership? And it may not be the best written paper, but there's something there that we can work with and help someone get to a publishable standard because it's something interesting. You know, it's an innovation that's going to be of interest to a lot of clinical educators, or it's about a topic that's important, so widening participation, diversity, health, etc. And, you know, I actually enjoy reading it. That's helpful. I think that kind of fits more than, there's probably 3 things altogether. What I dislike is probably the obverse of that, things that, you know, are sent in by authors who obviously haven't read the journal, and a paper that's obviously been somewhere else first. Now, that's not a problem in itself, but when the covering letter is addressed to medical teacher or one of the other journals and it hasn't been changed. For us, it's kind of, you know, a bit off-putting. And yes, so the things that are badly written, not because someone's not experienced at writing, but just because they're a bit lazy, I think. Yeah, so yeah, it's the presentation. Having a good presentation is important for editors.
Great, thank you. This is from Anonymous, whoever they are. For the clinical teacher, what are you looking for in order to have a successful letter to the editor or insight?
Okay, so I wrote an editorial about, maybe even 2 years ago, about letters to the editor. And I'll put this in the background. Sometimes it's not, you're not rejected because your letter is fundamentally bad. It's just that we're getting a lot of letters. And I can't fill my journal pages only with letters. So, you know, only the very best ones will get through. And what the letters I'm looking for is, I mean, following the guidelines, they have to be responding to something that we've published. So that's the first thing. And then it's just, I read it and I think, yeah, this has got something. It's interesting. So again, that interest, I think someone else will want to read this and they'll take something from it. It's not just agreeing with the paper that the authors are responding to. It's saying something else. It's adding something to that. It's arguing, challenging, provocative, or just moving it a bit further forward. You can critique the articles that have been published, but if you're going to do that, you know, it has to be in a reasonable way, not just sort of little picky things that you're picking up. And that is not the most compelling thing for me. It's that additional something that adds to the original. So those are letters, and they're really difficult to write well because there's only 250 words. You have to grab the reader in the first 2 sentences, and there has to be one message within that. So some people think, oh, it's only 250 words, it's going to be easy, but it's actually quite difficult. Insights, again, a similar sort of thing. It's something that grabs me when I start to read it. It's on an interesting topic. It's got some good insights. It's written from a personal perspective. So, you know, there's something about the author or authors within that 800 words. You know, we know something about the authors that tell us something about themselves. Why is this an important topic for them? It's not generic. If it's from, you know, it's got something about the country. If it's from, for example, let me think of one recently. So from Nepal, it tells us a bit about, you know, what's happening in Nepal. It could only have been written by those people. So again, you know, to get the flavour, if you look at insights articles in the clinical teacher, you'll see how varied they are. But they've all got something that's speaking to the readership. Just read lots.
Thank you.
Always read, keep reading.
Got a question now from Kim Walker. Do you think writing and publishing is a dying art as we move towards the use of social media more for dissemination, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, etc.?
Well, TikTok, I think you have to dance, don't you? So I think that's slightly different. I've not engaged with TikTok, but I know quite a bit about it just from reading stuff. It's interesting because you know, people for centuries have said English is, you know, getting bad. People can't speak and write proper English. You know, grammars came out in the 18th and 19th centuries to try and improve people's grammar. But English is still here, it's evolving. And you know, there's an English for every eventuality. So you know, we write differently on Twitter, but we still are communicating. People aren't going to read your tweets or follow you or retweet if they don't understand what you're saying. So the art of communication is there in whatever way you choose to disseminate it. I think academic papers, particularly in our fields, have become more readable over the last few decades. You know, we've moved away from stressing the way we learned, well, the way I learned at school when we were talking about science. You know, it was always that the test tube was picked up by someone, but you never knew who. You know, you never owned what you did. So we've moved from passive voice to active voice, and I think that's a good thing. But I think as long as there are humans communicating, we'll communicate in a lot of different ways. And there's a place for newspapers, there's a place for journals, even if they're online, and there is a place for opinion articles and a place for evidence-based articles. It's just we have to adapt and evolve. And there's a place for good English.
Thank you. Further question here from Hader Merchant. I'm currently completing an intercalated master's degree in clinical education and will be completing my final year of medical school come August. I'm really interested in undertaking a career in medical education alongside clinical practice. What would be your advice in pursuing this as a career for someone at my stage?
So your stage, you're actually doing a master's degree in your during your medical degree, which is pretty impressive, I have to say. And obviously you'll have to go. So you're in the UK. You'll have to do your foundation years to be able to use that as a springboard for anything else. I think in the UK. It's looking for an academic fellowship, an academic post, a clinical fellow would be the next stage of that. But while you're in foundation year, find a mentor, let the medical educators around you know you're interested, get invited to things, start writing, get your name known, start putting abstracts into conferences, getting about. Emailing people and saying, I'm interested. Is there any, positions, posts I can look for? But obviously, if you want to do clinical work as well, you have to look at, whatever specialty training you need to do that. So it could take you a lot longer. But it's getting yourself out there and known.
Good, thank you. I've got a question now to wait for some more to come through. What are you currently working on, Jill? What in terms of medical education?
Yeah, so my main, one of my jobs, so I've very much got a portfolio, what we call a portfolio career now. So one of my main jobs is I work for this not-for-profit organisation called NPS Medicine Wise, which is an independent, though government-funded body, which develops education for health professionals and consumers to improve quality use of medicines and tests. And we've just done a large educational intervention with GPs and hospital doctors and consumers around opioid prescribing, which is a big problem in Australia as it is in the UK. And so we've developed a lot of educational materials and we deliver the education face-to-face and virtually. As well as that, this last couple of weeks, I've been talking on the radio quite a lot, as I mentioned before, about medicinal cannabis. So I've now become an expert in medicinal cannabis in theory, if not in practice. So there's a lot of interest in that in Australia, and we're just starting to develop an educational program about heart failure. My job in the hospital sector with New South Wales Health is on hold at the moment because of the pandemic, and that's a position to improve the structure of education for doctors in hospitals from year 3 postgraduate, so PGY 3, onwards, who are not on specialist training pathways, and who are sometimes, as has been referred to in the UK, the lost tribe. So they move from job to job around the system, and then no one's really kind of monitors their professional development. So I'm setting up a pathway for them. But as I say, that a lot of the training as it is in the UK at the moment is on hold. So I'm just taking a leave of absence from that bit of my work at the moment. And I've just finished editing a book. So I'll be doing that.
Well, I did say my numbers when I read them out. Your numbers, rather, would only ever go up. So I was at least correct in that. We've got another question here from Anonymous, which may be the same or a different Anonymous, we'll never know. Are medical students able to become peer reviewers or assist in editing as a medical student editor in clinical teacher, or are there any journals you know or where medical students can get experience in editing?
Peer reviewers, yes. We're always looking for good peer reviewers at journals. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find peer reviewers. And people will probably notice who submit to journals at the moment that they may be taking longer to get a decision because it is becoming increasingly difficult. So yeah, if you're interested in peer review, speak to someone more senior who peer reviews, find out look at how you critically appraise papers. I mean, you should be taught that at medical school to some extent. And it's just, you know, it's a similar process. You're critically appraising a paper that's being submitted to a journal. You can apply to the journal through the journal office, which will be on any website, depending on the journal you're looking at, and say you'd like to become a peer reviewer, that you're a novice. And usually what happens with novice reviewers is that we always make sure that when a novice reviewer is reviewing a paper, there's more senior people as well. And one of the great things about being a peer reviewer is that you get to see the other peer reviewers' comments on the same paper. So that helps you, that helps you understand what people are looking at in papers. So yes, so medical students, and particularly medical students who've got first degrees and have an understanding of scientific papers and evidence, very, very happy to see you. In terms of editing, we wouldn't have an associate editor who's a medical student unless they've got some background other than being a medical student. If you want to get into that sort of area of publication, then you do have a student journal. You have a journal run by students in the UK. So you might want to get hold of the editor and say, I'd like to be involved in some way with that journal. The BMJ offers poster interns, but I think, as with medical education, unlikely to do that with medical students. But the first thing, well, the first two things I would say: peer review and try and get a paper published. Two things.
Good, thank you. We've just had a note there from Grace saying medical student editors stroke peer reviewers needed for Journal of the National Student Association of Medical Research, and there is a. There
you go. Very good.
There's a link straight there. So another question actually from me. Jill, if I may. What barriers did you find between moving between general practice and medical education? I'll say why, because I certainly had some, and we both trained as GPs. We both became GP trainers, and then you went left, if I might say so, to course organizer, and I went right to a GP tutor. And then we both did degrees from Dundee, a master's from Dundee, and then you went. Then I realised I'd hit my academic ceiling, and you went on to a PhD and an academic career, and I just spent the rest of my life winging it. But it was not easy, that combination of the job and getting those additional qualifications and moving over to what would have been for you as well as myself nothing guaranteed, whereas we could have stayed as general practitioners like forever and been very safe, but it wasn't a safe environment to flick over into at that time. What was your experience?
So I think I was in the right place at the right time. So as you said, I became a GP trainer as soon as I could. So I think I had to be a GP for 3 years, became a GP trainer, loved it, course organizer. So that's for those of you who don't know much about GP training, that's the person who runs the training program for all the GP registrars in a particular district. So, so I was a joint course organizer, and I was a full-time GP, which in those days entailed, being on call for 18,000 patients and, doing the full home births, all of this stuff. And this was in the 90s. And this was at the time when the GMC started saying to medical schools, more of your curricula have to be in the community. Not necessarily general practice, but general practice would be part of it. Over half your graduates become general practitioners, but only about 5% of the curriculum is actually based in the community, which is where patients are. So they were saying to medical schools, you've got to do something about this. And there was a few publications about community-based education, which I read. So I was already writing for the popular GP press at this point, so I sort of kind of used to doing that. So I could write, and I saw a job advertised at Leeds Medical School, and they wanted a senior lecturer in community-based education to fulfil the GMC requirements, and I lived 20 miles from Leeds. So I just thought, I'm going to apply for this. I'm halfway through a master's. I've got some publications in these educational journals. I'm going to apply for this. And I always remember I went for the interview at Leeds, and there was about 6 interviewers, and I think they were all male, which tended to happen for most of my interviews early in my career. It was usually a all male panel. And I got asked these questions and I answered them, and then I got rung up and offered the job, and they said, on paper, we weren't going to give you this job, but you talked yourself into it. So I was prepared. And that's how I started. So yeah, look, I didn't have a PhD at the time, but then there were quite a number of professors around the place who didn't have PhDs. That doesn't happen now. But I decided I was going to get a PhD, so I did eventually. So yeah, so I don't know. I was in the right place at the right time, and there were a lot of academic positions opened up because of that community-based movement in the 90s.
Good, thank you. Yeah. I love that, you know, and I thought I'd do a PhD and I got one. I mean, it is that easy to.
It wasn't quite like
Yeah,
it was.
really,
It was actually very
seriously.
traumatic. It was very
I should have done
traumatic.
one. I should have done one then, surely. I got anonymous again. There's a
One
lot
of my
anonymous.
PhD students is on this is attending here, and Amy will certainly know it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think we know that.
I just threw that away now.
Another question here.
It's late.
Where have I gone? A lot of face-to-face medical teaching has stopped for those of us not involved in curriculum development or affiliated directly to the university, i.e. clinical-based workers who often teach medical students on wards, either informally or more formal sessions like bedside teaching. How do you think it is best to be involved, innovate just now?
Yeah. Oh, well, if you've got an idea, again, I was actually very lucky at Leeds because people didn't know what to do with me, and they didn't really know what to do with community-based education. So I just went and did stuff without asking permission. No one told me I was supposed to ask permission. So we did all sorts. We tried all sorts out. And I think that's sometimes you know you're in these positions. If you go around getting permission to do things, and I'm not talking about ethically here, I'm talking about education, innovation, stuff like that. Try it out. Don't go waiting for all the permissions to come down from on high. Or if you feel you have to, write a good case for trying something. There has been a lot of interesting things happened very quickly, as I said before. Certainly there's been a lot of short papers in medical education around adaptations. And, I think people just said, we've got to do something. So let's try this.
Okay.
But it's another big question, that one. So I haven't got time to really go into it.
Yeah. Okay, I've got two more questions, and we'll probably close up once you've answered these final two. So those online, not to post anymore, unless you want Jill to answer them afterwards. This is from Noah. I'm a medical student from Pakistan. I've undertook one research so far. It was about mental health. I like the whole experience except for analysis of results and application of biostatistics. Maths is not my strong suit. What pathway would you suggest I take? Man after my own heart.
So pathway in I presume you mean a pathway in research. Either use, there is a quantitative qualitative divide which we should try and join together, but I mean that's how people tend to classify things. If you're interested in the quantitative side of things but you don't really like the numbers, then make sure you have a statistician that you can collaborate with. I would certainly never do anything with stats without a statistician to help. Because it's a discipline of itself, and you want an expert, so that would be one thing. But if you don't particularly like numbers, then do some courses on reading around qualitative research. But remembering, in the biomedical field, there is a feeling by some people that qualitative research is easier because it's just doing a load of interviews and waiting for themes to emerge from your data. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So, you need to build up expertise. But again, as with most of these things, where you've got ideas about your career, find a mentor, find someone you can talk to, someone senior who can help you, point you in the right direction, tell you what courses to go on. Have a collaboration with people. Don't research on your own, which is almost impossible to do.
Great. And then a final question, again, very close to my heart. This is from Grace. I think general attitudes are shifting, but have you found in your career that MedEd lacks the respect it deserves? I found often viewed as a soft science. How can we change this?
Um, hmm, uh, yeah, I suppose I haven't found med ed has been lacking respect as much as in some quarters general practice does. So I think that's the general practice academic or the general practice medical educator is sometimes that's more of a problem. Maybe not so much now, but it has been in the past. Even though certainly in Australia and the UK, medical education was formed mostly by GP educators. I mean, that's where it came through for many people. So I think it depends where you are. Medical schools are, as we always say around medical schools, you wouldn't be a medical school if you didn't have students, and you wouldn't have students if you didn't have educators. So medical schools are for education, and you need professional medical and health professional educators to help you do that well. And I think people are now respecting that. And if you look around at many medical schools, you will find that there are medical deans now who come through general practice, who come through medical education, and who are not all biomedical researchers. So I think it is changing, but there are some institutions that are lagging behind that, and that probably is the case in some countries as well. So get out there and be a good medical educator and advertise that your country needs you, and it's definitely not tough science.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Jill. That's been very insightful for the last 45 minutes, and I hope, and I'm sure it has been a great help for those who have also participated online. Again, thank you very much, Jill, and everyone who's participated today. It's been a delight and a pleasure to have awarded you the President's Medal, and there can be absolutely no question, not that there ever was, about the contribution that you continue to make, both to ASME and the global subject of medical education. Thank you very much indeed.